So summer is starting to give way to autumn. We're getting lots of rain coming through, humidity levels are going up, and consequently we're getting all sorts of questions from you to ask David about all sorts of fungal problems. We'll answer some of those during the next few questions, but meanwhile let's go on and answer some of the others. So the first question comes from Liz, and she's asking about some of the young plants that she's got growing on so far this year. She attended our masterclass online on summer cuttings, and she's got lots of little baby plants that she wants to know what to do with. Her question is, should she plant them out in the garden now, or should she overwinter them under glass in a greenhouse, ready to plant out next spring? And I think that latter is the best thing to do, Liz. Keep them in the greenhouse. It doesn't need to be heated. An unheated greenhouse should be fine, or a cold frame, and keep those baby plants ticking over through the autumn and on through the winter. If it gets very cold this winter, then try and do something to insulate the cold frame or the glass house to keep the worst of the frost out. Keep those little plants ticking over and then plant them out in about April or May next year. That way you'll get the best results. Now Campbell is asking about using the royal fern Osmunda regalis as a marginal plant, and he's wondering what the best way to plant it up as a marginal in his pond. He's asking what the best way to do it is. So the thing here is to use a loam based compost to plant the fern into. I would use one of the proper aquatic baskets, or if you're planting directly onto a marginal shelf, then secure the marginal shelf with a line of bricks along the edge or something, just to retain the compost in position before planting. And whichever way you decide to plant, then use a loam based compost or a bag of just ordinary loam, and make sure that you plant in it firmly and pack the loam around the roots of the plant, and then lower the plant carefully into the water so that you don't muddy the water. If you're going to plant into a marginal shelf edged with bricks or stones, then drain some of the water out of the pond first, fill the marginal shelf up with the soil or the loam, plant the Osmunda in place, and then gradually fill the pond back up again. And again, that way you won't muddy the water and contaminate it with the loam. But either way, use a loam based compost and you won't go wrong. Toni wants to know about her foxgloves. She sowed some seed of foxgloves last year. They germinated well. She had some little plants that she overwintered, and then this year again they've grown quite big, but they haven't flowered, and she wants to know whether she should dig them up and get rid of them and start again with some more seed, or whether they will ever flower. Toni, be patient. Sometimes foxgloves take 2 or even 3 years to reach flowering size. Once they get to flowering size, they will be spectacular. And actually, the bigger the plants, the better the flowers will be. So I would leave well alone, leave them in the ground, keep them over the winter. Next spring, I can almost guarantee you'll have a wonderful display. Liz wants to know about her roses. She says that she sprays them quite regularly against black spot and mildew, and yet still they get black spot and mildew, and she wants to know what my advice would be to try and avoid this problem. Well, for me, Liz, I am really keen to try not to use sprays, and most of the roses in my garden, I don't spray them at all, and I get very little in the way of black spot and mildew. And I think it's a lot of it down to the pruning. If you prune your roses to leave a goblet shape, then that allows the air to circulate in the centre of the rose bush and dry out the foliage, which in turn reduces the problems with fungal infestation. So in the autumn, I'd cut your roses back by about half their height, and then just as they're starting into growth early next spring, I'd cut all your bushes hard back to outward facing buds so that the rose bush grows into a goblet shape, keeping that centre open, and I bet you that you'll keep that black spot and mildew at bay. And last this week, Stephie is asking about her fig tree. She says some of the leaves have turned yellow and are dropping off, and she wants to know if this is a problem or whether it's just something that happens at this time of year. Stephie, the light levels are starting to decrease, the day length is starting to get shorter, and all that vigorous growth that the fig made earlier in the season, now those older leaves are starting to give up the ghost and they're starting to get old. And the way the fig deals with that is by cutting off the supply of moisture to those leaves, going into an early autumn spell, and those lower leaves will start to turn yellow and drop off. So there's nothing unusual in it at all. You could give them a helping hand, but I'd be inclined to leave those leaves to drop off naturally. That way they won't ooze the milky latex out of the end of the leaf and drip it on the ground underneath. So leave them well alone, allow the leaves to drop off naturally, and your fig should be fine. So there's our questions answered for another week. Join me next week when I'll answer more of your questions in Ask David.